Hi, and welcome to this module on auditing in our Titration video series. So Titration, in many ways, is auditing your network and your applications. It's looking at the flows, it's looking at the communication behaviors, and it's building application policies, and ultimately helping you enforce those policies. So on the flip side, it surely makes sense to also be able to audit what the Titration system is doing itself. If you're enforcing policy that is actually affecting production traffic on your network, if something changes, you really want to be able to see who changed it and why did they change it. So that's what we're going to do in this session, Remi. We'll look at the auditing capabilities of Titration.
Okay, so the idea is to see who's doing what and how?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So,
I like that. It's like the git blame applied to Titration.
Yeah, exactly. You can see a line-by-line reason as to exactly why that ended up there and who did it. So
I like that.
There's a couple of different parts of auditing. There are some global auditing logs and there are some specific audit logs for particular applications and policies. So we're going to walk through from the most generic audit logs right down to those very specific application level logs.
Okay.
Now, depending on who you are logged into the Titration cluster as, you might see or not see some of these different capabilities in the user interface. For example, global auditing is reserved for the owner of that particular scope, and you cannot see that if you are a lower privileged user. That's because you can see every single action that was taken on the cluster. On the flip side, if you are an owner of a particular application policy, you can see all of the audit logs that relate to your application. So just be aware of that. If you're following along with this on your cluster and you can't see some of these capabilities, it might be because of the type of privilege that you have. So let's start with the generic policies or the generic auditing, Remi, and we'll come up to the top right-hand corner here. You can see that I'm logged in as the site administrator, which gives me that capability, and I will be able to see changelog.
Okay.
So this changelog is the big one. This is every change that you make on the system. Every time an object is modified, we track that change, what type of change it was, who did it, and what were the specifics of that change.
I can see you're pretty much used to using the site admin instead of using your account.
So I'm possibly guilty of that. I'm not always liking to do my two-factor authentication. And what we can see here is some of the different things that we've been doing. So I can see that you signed out, actually, and that was an update to the user record for your account. I can see that the site administrator was updating scopes, publishing new policies.
You mean, right?
Me, okay, I'll take responsibility for it. There's only two of us, so it must be one of us. So we can see exactly every single thing that happened. So for example, if I want to know more information about this scope here, I can click that and it's going to give me more details about that particular scope ID. So it's changed it from being needing to commit scope updates, dirty equals true in this case, to changing to dirty equals false, which means that we did commit a scope update.
So in that model, we're actually tracking down to every single object and every change in every single object.
Yes.
That's pretty detailed.
No hiding from the auditing.
I like that.
Now, you might see that this changelog is quite large. Here we have 184 pages of changes.
That's a lot.
That's a lot, and this is just a small demo system.
And you're expecting me to browse and read through 184 pages?
No, I'm not going to ask you to read through every single 184 pages. I mean, if you want to go to sleep later, perhaps you could. So there are a couple of different ways to get to this information in a faster way in terms of a specific object. So we could obviously begin to filter things down here. I want to see actions that might be destruction or create or update. I want to see some details about that. What scope was it? What application was it that I changed? And you can do this directly from this configuration screen here or this audit log screen.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yep. But
can I get that out?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. So again, this is also available over the API. So if you want to use the Open API to extract this audit logging, totally possible, especially if you have requirements to store audit logs for a certain number of days. Now, the Titration cluster is actually going to be able to store these audit logs for a very long period of time, but it is a rotational buffer. So if it gets to the point that your audit logs are reaching a certain size, they are going to start dropping the end of the audit logs. That could be many, many months of time, even years, depending on the size of the cluster that you have and the volume of activity. But if you know that you have a specific requirement, some requirement that says I have to keep 1 year's worth of logs, then we might advise actually pulling these audit log trails out of the system via the API.
Because I think it would be considered good practice to pull it out and push it into the SIEM system.
Yeah, I mean, titration is very powerful. It is a major component of your data center. You're going to be enforcing policy based on what titration is doing, so it makes sense to monitor what the users are doing on that system and the actions that they are taking. So let's look at some of these audit logs from a slightly different perspective. So we can see the entire list here, but if we go to certain sections of the configuration, we'll also see some little icons that represent the audit log for that individual object.
Okay.
So for example, I can see that there is the agent configuration profile called Acme. And next to the edit and delete button, I have this kind of parchment paper or scroll. And that is going to show me the changelog.
Okay.
So by clicking that changelog, it's actually going to pre-filter me exactly every change of that object.
Oh, I see. So in fact, you have the whole list if you need it, but you would not really use it, right? I mean, you would end up always going through the section that actually makes sense if you're not exporting it.
Yeah, if you have a sysadmin that comes to you and says, hey, why did that configuration change on my workload? Why did you enable enforcement? Why did you disable enforcement? You can go right to the specific object that you're interested in and get the logs for that object and that object only. So here I can see the full current state of this object, and then I can also go down and see what changes we made. So for example, I changed it from being enforcement disabled to enforcement enabled, and I know it's me because I must have been logged in as the administrator account.
I see. I think if you go in the event log, though, you can get the IP address to see who's logged in if you really wanted to.
Yes, you absolutely can. You can go right down to the IP address. Obviously, that IP you can then pass into the rest of the titration system and find out some information about who that was. Let's say you're using ICE or AnyConnect, you could actually pin that IP down to a particular laptop or user.
That's nice. That's very nice.
There is no getting away from titration.
That's perfect.
So we have the audit logs there, where we see that those audit logs are available for the software agents. We have the same for scopes, including seeing the changelog of the entire scope tree or being able to see certain scopes that were deleted. Essentially, whenever you see that little scroll icon, that means that you can see the changelog for that object.
Okay, pretty cool. So we've talked about global audit log. We can see the whole audit of all the platform, minute by minute, second per second, across the life. Someone logs in, changes his password, anything like that you can see down there. We've seen how you can jump to specific events if you want to. But there's one view I'm still missing on our segmentation platform.
The segmentation view, or the application policies view.
Exactly.
Right. This is the one that's actually probably one of the most critical changelogs to become familiar with. Because the changelog for the applications shows you exactly what changes were made in terms of enforcing policy. So let's pop over to that on the left-hand side here. We're going to click Applications. And then there's two major pieces of tracking that we have for applications. There is the global policy enforcement state, and then there is the individual policies and the individual audit logs on a per workspace basis.
Okay. So what does global do then? It's because, I mean, I can go to every single workspace. What's the point of using global?
So as we discovered in the segmentation section, there are multiple workspaces that can hold segmentation policies. And when we enforce those policies, we come out with a final global set of rules that are going to be enforced on the workloads. Now, to create that global set of rules, because it's multiple workspaces, it's useful to be able to see, well, which workspaces were actually taking part in that global set of rules. If I don't have a workspace enabled, if it's not enforcing policy, it won't make up that final set of rules that are enforced on the workload.
So in short, enforcement history is the changelog of all enforcement.
Exactly.
Okay.
Let's say that someone accidentally enables enforcement across every single application and starts dropping traffic. That is going to be in the global enforcement history log, and you can't run away from that. And you'll be able to see that very quickly, and if necessary, you can correlate that issue to what's happening on the network and roll back that change while still keeping that historical record. So we'll find that in the bottom right-hand corner here, which is the enforcement history.
Okay.
So this shows us a simplified view of exactly what has happened in a linear fashion from our enforcement perspective. So that means things like enabling policy enforcement, disabling policy enforcement, updating policy enforcement. And also, it gives you the capability to see the version of the policy that you have enforced.
Okay, so I see, for example, you updated the policy from P1 to P2.
Yeah.
What update did you do?
So by clicking this, I'll be able to see some more information about that exact update. So I can see the change going from version P1 to P2. In this case, I didn't have any policies in P2, but you'd be able to see exactly what happened during that update. Well, actually, I clicked the wrong one. In my default policies, I can see the policies that were changed. So I added a set of policies in P2 that allowed me to create some communication between the different components of my data lake application.
I see. So that part, the top part is the absolute policy, the bottom part is the default policies.
Yes. And this
So
window
they're reordered.
is actually showing me the complete set of policies across the global hierarchy.
Oh, because of course, if you're making an update now, you need to understand what was the actual state of the default policies at the moment you actually made the change. Otherwise, I mean, you might have a problem that could be linked to something that was changed at the same time at a different level.
You have it right.
Okay.
And if you want more information about what these absolute policies mean, what these default policies mean, and how they fit with the catch-all rules, I would definitely recommend that you check out the module on policy ordering and hierarchy. It's going to give you all of the information around how these policies are ordered and how they will be resolved on an individual workload by workload basis. So let's come back to our application screen here. And we know that we have our enforcement history from a global state. But there is also an individual history inside each workspace. This shows us the changes made on a per policy level.
Yeah.
So how about we jump into our familiar banking core prod application and see what we've been doing there.
I think a few users have been playing with this one. Let's have a look.
Yes, I think we've been playing with this a lot. So on the left here, we have the analysis of the audit log. It looks like a kind of clock going backwards.
It's like time machine style.
Time machine style. And we'll go down there and we can see a couple of different things that we have available to us under the application workspace. So there is the activity log, the versions, and the published versions.
I see, okay.
So what does this look like? It looks like Rob has been doing a lot of stuff as well.
Yeah, it seems that you've also been continuing to do your site admin thing.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't hide from that, Tim.
No.
Okay, so that's pretty clear. So you can see all the changes, that you changed an app, you modified the policy enforcement. There was a comment on the policy enforcement which was linked to the whatever you type. So a change request in that event, so you can link it back to a change request. Rob launched a few ADM runs. You made some modification like deleted adding. That's pretty detailed.
Yeah. And it's a chronological list in reverse order. So we have the most recent events at the top and the older events at the bottom. And so you can see in this one, we can go all the way back to the point where we created this workspace.
Okay.
Now, as you can see inside this change log, or in the activity log, we do a couple of things such as publishing a new version, enforcing policy. All of those are tracked as individual events that you can compare before and after. So let's take a look at these different versions. So here we have version number 5. So what does a version mean in this scenario?
I'm guessing it means that someone clicked the policy analysis tab.
So the version here is actually iterated every single time that I run ADM.
Ah, so that's not even the tabs. Tabs will be published then.
That's it.
Oh.
See, when you initiate policy analysis, that's when you start actually advertising these policies as a set of policies that other users can look at. When you're inside the workspace and you're just playing around with the different policies and trying to run ADM, compare the different settings that you might be able to run, and see what works for this application, they are going to be stored in individual versions. So effectively, every time that you run ADM, you will get a new version. And you can see that signified by the fact that every time it says via an ADM run. So inside that version, number one, I can give each version a name.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. If you have some particular event, whether it's a change request or some reason that you've updated that policy, it's useful to track it. And then I can actually go back in time to see these different versions. So if I wanted to see an older version of this workspace, I would be able to click switch to version. And that is actually going to take me back in time to a different view of this application workspace.
Oh, wait a minute. Does that mean you just roll back the policy there?
As we learned before, luckily, no.
Okay, I prefer that.
So everything that we're doing is totally in a read-only mode. We can go back, we can go forward, we can add, we can delete. There is nothing that we can do until we click enforce policies. In fact, if I were to click enforce policies right now, it would actually say to me, you know what, you need to go to the latest version of this workspace before you can enforce those policies.
I mean, that makes sense. I mean, you wouldn't want to accidentally roll back to the wrong version.
And if you have gone back in time to an older version of policies, you will see that this has gone orange. So it says you are looking at a read-only past version of this workspace. You can't make changes. You can't edit the policies here because this is what it looked like in the past.
Okay, I see.
So if you get into this scenario and you've gone back to an old version and you're like, where is the button to add new policies to that workspace? Seen that one before?
Yeah.
All you need to do is click switched to the latest version. That's going to bring you back up to version 5 in this circumstance, which is the current version of the policy where I could start making changes again.
So yellow, read only, green, read write.
Yep.
Easy.
Now, if we come back to our versions here and look at the published versions, here is where we can see the actual changes in the policy analysis. So every time that I create a new policy analysis event, it is going to put a flag down and say that is published version P1, P2, P3, P4. These are also immutable, so I can go back in time and see exactly what the policy looked like when I was analyzing that policy.
So application activity logs any updates or changes inside the workspace. Versions ADM triggered, published versions enforcement triggered, or policy analysis triggered.
Yes.
Okay. How can I see the details? Because I mean, there I don't see lots of details, right?
So for each one of these, whether it's a published version or a workspace version, we can click any of these log events and it will show me exactly what happened inside that version. So it's going to say, well, to create this new version, V5, you ran ADM. You also published the latest version of the policies. You then went ahead and actually enforced that policy, P4, and you put a reason behind it. And then we even converted the banking web cluster to the inventory filter banking web.
Okay, so you can see all the details per change with regards to the previous version every time.
Yep. And if you want to see a diff view of what it looked like in the past and what it looks like now, you can click Compare Revisions.
Right,
so here,
that's I like.
Look, if you're familiar with doing software engineering as well, this is going to become something that you're used to. If you've ever done any Git merging or anything like that, it's exactly the same principle. What was taken away from the policy and what was added. So we're comparing version P3 and P4. And what we know is that we made some changes. We removed one policy and we added another policy during that change set.
It's actually even more than just software engineering. I mean, how often does a network engineer come in, takes two rolling configs, and he actually looks at the difference between each of them? So basically, this is automated.
Yeah, that's true, actually. This really is like comparing two versions of ACLs over time and seeing, well, exactly what was different between them. And I really can go very far. I could go all the way back to one of my oldest versions of this application and compare them. I can even see the differences between the clusters. So in this case, we removed the banking web cluster and we added that as a filter. I could even compare that with the very first revision where we had absolutely nothing in this workspace. So it actually shows me from 0 all the way through to the latest version of this application workspace.
That's a pretty good auditing capability. I mean, you can literally go back to any point in time, see all the data, see what's going on, who did it change, what changed, in every little details, in multiple views, that depending on the audience for that point.
Yes, and in fact, one more interesting way to get to this data is through the policy analysis system. So let's say that I look at the last week's worth of data, or maybe I'll go to the last day. Okay, week looks better. We can see the flags that are dropped on the graph there.
Yeah.
So we have version 4, we have some older versions, version 3 here. That's where we added port 5000 back into the system. So just like we could navigate through the system on the left-hand side there, we can also just click this flag, and it's going to take me to that same view of what did the published policy look like at that point in time.
Okay. And I see published policy, though they show up in blue.
Yes.
Those ones. So it's still read-only.
Still read-only. It's just if it's a published version of those policies, it's going to be in blue.
Okay. That's very nice. Is there any way I can modify old versions or anything like that? I mean, is there like any other way than in the UI that can make a change?
Yeah, you can always make a change through the API as well. So if you're changing policies through the API, that's going to be tracked through the tracking system. and you'll be able to see all of those individual changes. It doesn't have to be a user-driven change to this application.
Okay, perfect. So user, API, any sort of changes will be tracked through this model. Okay,
Yep.
makes sense. And the data is read-only, fully read-only, the history log.
Yes.
Okay, cannot be tampered.
Yes, it cannot be tampered with. The only one choice that you have is you can delete older versions of an application's policies if you want to do so, but you cannot actually remove the audit trail of who created those policies and what those policies look like. You just won't show them as versions anymore, especially if you're getting into an application that might have been around for a long time. It just helps you clear out some of that old application policy that you don't need anymore.
But obviously that creates an event log, a
Yes.
change log globally on that.
Yes.
Okay, so I still have track.
There's a log on top of the log, basically.
Awesome. Login of login of login is always good.
Inception logging.
Exactly.
Okay, well, at this point, we've covered all of the different types of logs that we have available in Titration, from the global logs to the individual logs on objects like software agents or software agent configurations, through to the application logs, whether that is ADM-generated logs or published logs, and how we can move around between them and compare the different revisions. So if you'd like more information on Titration, please visit cisco.com/go/Titration.